sometimes the hand of justice becomes the hand of death. The neon lights of Calle Ocho flickered like dying stars against the humid Miami night as Detective Carlos Vasquez pulled up to the glass tower that housed more secrets than the FBI's most classified files. The domestic violence call had come in routine enough. Rich man, beautiful woman, neighbors complaining about screaming. But nothing about the penthouse felt routine when he stepped inside. The woman's bruises were real, her tears genuine, but something in her eyes spoke of training, of a mind calculating angles while her mouth spoke of fear. When she whispered, "I'm Maradona's wife," Checo's blood went cold. Eduardo Salinas, known in the underworld as Maradona for his ability to make evidence disappear like magic, was the ghost that haunted every DEA agent's nightmares. Checo had fled Colombia 5 years ago after Salinas's men murdered his family. Now, following protocol, he placed restraining hands on the woman as she tried to leave the scene. The security camera's red light blinked like a demon's eye, recording everything. 3 hours later, his phone buzzed with a message that made his hands tremble. "We know where you live, detective. You touched what belongs to us." What Checo didn't know was that he just signed 2 death warrants, his own and that of the undercover DEA agent whose life he'd accidentally destroyed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. The phone slipped from Checo's fingers, clattering against the cracked tile of his kitchen floor like a gunshot in the silence. The message glowed up at him, each word burning into his retinas. "We know where you live, detective. You touched what belongs to us." His hands found the bottle of aguardiente on the counter, muscle memory from 5 years of drowning ghosts. The Colombian liquor burned down his throat, but it couldn't wash away the taste of fear that coated his mouth like ash. Through the grimy window of his little Havana apartment, the same neon lights that had welcomed him to the penthouse now seemed to mock him, casting everything in blood-red shadows. Maradona's wife. The woman's words echoed in his mind as he replayed every second of the encounter. She'd been standing in that pristine living room, designer dress torn at the shoulder, makeup smeared like war paint. The man, some mid-level accountant by the look of him, had been zip-tied and read his rights before Checo even got her statement. Standard procedure. Everything by the book, except the book had never prepared him for her. Isabella Restrepo, she'd said her name was. Dark hair falling in waves over bruised shoulders, eyes that shifted between victim and something else, something that reminded him of the agents he'd worked with in Bogota. But when she'd mentioned Maradona, all his training had evaporated like morning mist. Eduardo Salinas had been a shadow over Checo's life for longer than he cared to remember. First as a DEA target, then as the monster who'd ordered the hit on his family. Maria and little Ana gunned down outside their Medellin home while Checo was testifying in a Miami courthouse about Salinas's cocaine routes. The cartel's message had been clear: cross us, and everyone you love dies. Now, staring at his phone's cracked screen, that same message was being delivered again. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in like a coffin. Checo moved to the window, pulling the blind aside just enough to scan the street below. A black Escalade sat under the broken streetlight 3 blocks down, the same one that had been there when he'd gotten home an hour ago. As he watched, the driver's cigarette flared orange in the darkness. They're already here. His service weapon lay in its holster on the kitchen table, next to a stack of overdue bills and a photo of his family that he couldn't bring himself to throw away but couldn't bear to look at. 5 years in Miami had taught him that some ghosts never stop haunting. They just change their hunting grounds. The woman, Isabella, had tried to leave the scene before he'd finished taking her statement. Protocol demanded he detain potential victims until the investigation was complete, especially in cases involving suspected cartel connections. His hands had been gentle but firm on her shoulders, guiding her back to the couch, ensuring she stayed put for her own safety. The security camera had been mounted in the corner like a mechanical vulture, its lens capturing every angle. At the time, Checo had been grateful for the surveillance. Domestic violence cases lived and died on evidence. Now he realized that camera had just filmed his death sentence. His phone buzzed again. This time, no words, just a photo. His apartment building, taken from the street. The timestamp showed it was captured 20 minutes ago. Checo's hand instinctively moved to his weapon, but he forced himself to stop. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. In Colombia, he'd learned that scared men made fatal mistakes. The cartel wanted him afraid. It made the hunt more entertaining. But something about the night still bothered him beyond his own impending execution. The woman's eyes kept flashing through his memory. The way she'd assessed the room when she thought he wasn't looking. The subtle tension in her posture that spoke of combat training, not just trauma. And her reaction when he'd mentioned calling the DEA for additional support on anything Maradona related. A flash of something that looked almost like panic. Who was she really? The Escalade's engine rumbled to life below, headlights cutting through the humid air like searchlights. But instead of approaching his building, it pulled away, disappearing around the corner toward Calle Ocho. They weren't coming for him tonight. They wanted him to sweat first, to understand that death was inevitable but not immediate. Checo poured another shot of aguardiente and walked to his laptop. If he was going to die for touching Maradona's wife, he damn well wanted to know what kind of woman was worth a death sentence. His DEA contacts were thin these days, but some favors never expired. As he started typing Isabella Restrepo's name into the federal database, one thought crystallized in his mind. In 3 hours, a routine domestic call had somehow connected his past to his present, and neither one was going to let him walk away alive. The screen flickered to life, and Checo began to discover just how wrong he'd been about everything. The database connection timed out 3 times before Checo finally got through. His old DEA credentials still carried enough weight to access basic records, though he knew every search left a digital fingerprint. At this point, stealth seemed less important than survival. Isabella Restrepo's file loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, like a Polaroid developing in reverse. But when her photo appeared, Checo's blood turned to ice water. The woman staring back at him from the screen had Isabella's face, Isabella's dark hair, Isabella's defiant eyes. But the name beneath read Agent Sofia Restrepo, DEA Special Operations, Undercover Assignment, Classified. Handler, Agent Marcus Webb. Current status, Deep Cover, Operation Kingfish. Mierda. The word escaped his lips like a prayer to a god who'd stopped listening years ago. Checo's hands trembled as he scrolled through the limited information available. Webb's name rang familiar. They'd worked parallel operations in Colombia, though never directly together. If Webb was running Sofia, then tonight's domestic violence call wasn't random. It was federal business, and Checo had stumbled into it like a drunk tourist wandering into a cartel meeting. His phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through the apartment's suffocating quiet. Unknown number, Miami area code. Checo almost didn't answer. Death threats rarely came with caller ID, but something made him swipe to accept. Vasquez. Detective, this is Agent Webb, DEA. We need to talk. The voice carried the weight of authority and barely controlled panic. Checo closed the laptop and moved away from the window, suddenly paranoid about sniper scopes and long-range microphones. About your agent? About the fact that you just burned 3 months of deep cover work by putting your hands on her in front of Maradona's security cameras. Webb's voice could have frozen the humid Miami air. Sofia was inside that penthouse gathering intelligence on Salinas's money laundering operation. The domestic violence scenario was her exit strategy, until you decided to follow protocol. Checo sank into his worn leather chair, the same one where he'd spent countless nights drinking away the ghosts of Maria and Ana. The irony tasted bitter as Colombian coffee. His careful adherence to procedure, the same dedication that had made him a good DEA agent, had just destroyed a federal investigation and signed 2 death warrants. Where is she now? Safe house in Coral Gables. But not for long. Salinas's people are already mobilizing. You've got maybe 6 hours before they figure out she's not really his wife, and when they do, Webb let the threat hang in the air like humidity. What do you need from me? Nothing. You've done enough. The line went quiet for a moment, then Webb's voice returned, softer but no less urgent. Look, Vasquez, I know your history with Salinas, what happened to your family in Medellin. This isn't your fight anymore. But it was. The moment Checo had touched Sofia's shoulders, the moment those cameras had captured his face, it had become his fight whether he wanted it or not. The cartel didn't distinguish between intentional interference and bad luck. They only understood retribution. I need to see her. If we're both marked, we should coordinate. Absolutely not. Sophia's extraction is already in motion. A team from Quantico lands at Miami International in 4 hours. She'll be in protective custody by dawn. Webb's tone suggested the conversation was over. My advice? Disappear. Tonight, use whatever contacts you have left and get out of Florida. The line went dead, leaving Checo alone with the weight of 5 years' worth of carefully constructed routine crumbling around him. His morning runs along Bayfront Park, the Cuban coffee from Versailles restaurant that had become his religion, Tuesday poker games with other washed-up cops who understood that some stories were too heavy to carry alone, Thursday dinners at his neighbor Mrs. Garcia's apartment, where she fed him arroz con pollo and pretended not to notice when he stared too long at photos of her grandchildren. It wasn't much of a life, but it washes life, the only one he'd managed to build from the wreckage of everything he'd lost. Checo walked to his bedroom and pulled a go-bag from beneath the bed, old habits from his DEA days. Passport, cash, untraceable phone, clean weapon. Everything a dead man needed to become someone else. But as he zipped the bag closed, his fingers found the photo of Maria and Anna tucked into the side pocket. Running meant abandoning their memory to the same shadows that had consumed everything else. It meant letting Salinas win again. Outside, another engine rumbled to life. This time, the headlights stayed dark as the vehicle prowled past his building like a shark testing the waters. They were getting bolder, more confident. Soon, they wouldn't bother with surveillance at all. Checo had a choice to make, and 6 hours to make it. Run and live as someone else, or stay and fight for a justice system that had already failed him once. He poured another shot of aguardiente and began to plan. The first bullet shattered Checo's kitchen window at 3:47 a.m. He'd been sitting at his table, the go-bag zipped and ready beside him, when the glass exploded inward like deadly confetti. Training kicked in before conscious thought. Checo rolled left, grabbing his service weapon as he hit the floor. The aguardiente bottle erupted in a spray of liquor and glass where his head had been seconds before. So much for 6 hours. More shots followed, methodical and precise, chewing through the thin walls of his apartment like termites through rotted wood. These weren't cartel foot soldiers spraying bullets and praying. This was professional work. Each round placed to funnel him toward the front door, toward whatever reception committee waited in the hallway. Checo's phone buzzed against his chest. A text message that made his blood freeze. We have the dia puta. Come alone to Bayfront Park, Pier 7. 1 hour, or we start mailing pieces. Attached was a photo of Sofia Restrepo zip-tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. Her face was bruised, but her eyes held the same defiant fire he'd seen in the penthouse. Behind her stood 2 men in expensive suits. Salinas's enforcers, the kind who treated murder like accounting. Webb's safe house had been compromised. The federal extraction was blown. Everything Checo had believed about the situation crumbled like his apartment walls under the continued gunfire. But something else crystallized in that moment of absolute chaos. The choice he'd been wrestling with for the past 3 hours had just been made for him. His phone rang. Webb again. They took her, Checo said without preamble, crawling toward his bedroom as bullets continued to ventilate his living room. Your safe house was blown. Impossible. The location was need to know, and only 3 agents. Webb's voice caught, the awful realization hitting him mid-sentence. Jesus Christ. We have a leak. They want me at Bayfront Park in an hour. Alone. It's a trap. Salinas will kill you both regardless. Checo reached his bedroom and pulled the go-bag closer, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. The cartel had made one crucial mistake. They'd given him a location and a timeline. After 5 years of running from shadows, they'd finally offered him something concrete to fight against. Maybe. But right now she's alive because they need me. That gives us leverage. Us? Webb's voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. Vasquez, if there's a mole in my operation, I can't trust anyone at DEA Miami. Official channels are compromised. Through his shattered window, Checo could hear sirens approaching, neighbors reporting gunshots. In minutes, His building would be crawling with Miami-Dade officers who couldn't help him, and federal agents who might be working for Salinas. The walls were closing in from every direction. "There's something else," Webb continued. Sophia wasn't just gathering financial intelligence. She discovered Salinas is planning something big, a massive shipment that would flood the East Coast, with enough fentanyl to kill thousands. "We're talking about a public health catastrophe if it reaches the streets." Checo closed his eyes, seeing Maria and Anna's faces superimposed over Sophia's bruised features in the photo. 5 years ago, he'd failed to protect the people he loved. Tonight, he had a chance to save someone else's family, even if it meant walking into certain death. The gunfire stopped abruptly, replaced by an ominous silence that felt heavier than the bullets. They were repositioning, preparing for an assault. Checo had maybe 5 minutes before they breached his apartment and found it empty. "Webb, I need you to do something for me. Mrs. Garcia in apartment 3B, she's got grandchildren, and she's been like a mother to me. Make sure Salinas's people don't touch her. Whatever happens tonight, she stays safe. What are you planning?" Checo shouldered the go-bag and moved toward his bedroom window, which faced the alley behind his building. 3 stories down, but the dumpster would break his fall if he aimed correctly. Beyond that lay the maze of little Havana streets he'd come to know, as well as the mountain paths around Medellin. "I'm going to do what I should have done 5 years ago. I'm going to finish this. You can't take on Salinas's entire organization alone. This is suicide." But as Checo kicked out the remaining glass and prepared to jump, he realized Webb was wrong. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Somewhere in a warehouse by the bay, a federal agent was fighting the same enemy that had destroyed his family. For the first time in 5 years, Checo had something worth more than survival. He had purpose. The Miami night air rushed up to meet him as he leaped into the darkness, leaving behind the ruins of his ordinary world for a path that led either to redemption or death. Either way, Eduardo Salinas was about to learn that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. The dumpster hit like concrete wrapped in steel, driving the air from Checo's lungs in a violent rush. He rolled off the twisted metal and garbage, tasting blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Above him, flashlight beams swept across his bedroom window. They'd breached the apartment and found nothing but bullet holes and broken glass. 47 minutes. Checo limped through the alley, keeping to the shadows between flickering streetlights. The go-bag felt heavier with each step, weighted down not just with weapons and cash, but with the crushing realization of what he was walking toward. Bayfront Park meant open ground, no cover, nowhere to run. Salinas's people would have shooters positioned on every approach, boats in the water, escape routes locked down tight. He'd seen their handiwork before, bodies found days later in the Everglades, or sometimes not found at all. The cartel didn't just kill, they erased people from existence, turned human beings into cautionary tales whispered in little Havana's darkest corners. "What the hell am I doing?" The question stopped him cold beside a graffiti-covered wall where someone had spray-painted "Los muertos no hablan," "The dead don't speak." Maria's face flashed through his memory, the way she'd smiled that last morning in Medellin, brewing coffee while Anna practiced piano scales in the next room. He'd kissed them both goodbye, promising to be home for dinner, never knowing it was the last time he'd see them alive. 5 years of survivor's guilt crystallized into a single paralyzing truth. He was about to get another innocent woman killed. Sofia Restrepo was DEA, trained and capable, but she was also someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister. In a warehouse somewhere, she was zip-tied and bleeding because he'd followed protocol instead of recognizing an undercover operation, because he'd put his hands on her shoulders in front of cameras that belonged to the most ruthless cartel boss in the hemisphere. Checo's phone buzzed. Another photo, this one showing Sofia's face, a fresh cut bleeding from her cheek. The message was clear: "Hurry up." 9 minutes. He forced himself to keep moving through the labyrinth of little Havana's back streets, past closed bodegas and sleeping houses where families dreamed safely behind locked doors. These people trusted him to protect them from the monsters that lurked in Miami's shadows. What kind of protector was he if he walked knowingly into a trap? Webb was right. This was suicide. Salinas had resources, manpower, and 5 years of careful planning. Checo had a service weapon, a go-bag, and a death wish born from too many nights staring at photos of his murdered family. The math was brutal and unforgiving. But then he remembered something else, the look in Sofia's eyes when she'd first claimed to be Maradona's wife. Not just fear or desperation, but calculation. She'd been thinking 3 moves ahead, even while playing the victim, running scenarios and exit strategies like any good agent. She wouldn't go down without a fight. If she's still fighting, why aren't you? The thought came in Maria's voice, soft but insistent. His dead wife had never tolerated self-pity, never let him wallow in defeat. Levante, Carlos, she used to say when life knocked him down. Get up. Checo found himself standing at the intersection of Calle Ocho and 17th Avenue. The heart of Little Havana spread out around him like a second homeland. In 5 years, this community had given him something he'd thought lost forever, a reason to get up each morning. Mrs. Garcia's arroz con pollo, the poker games where nobody asked too many questions about the past, the routine calls that let him help people without getting them killed. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was his, and Salinas wanted to take that away too. 8 minutes. The paralysis broke like a fever. Checo wasn't walking toward Bayfront Park to die, he was walking toward it to live, to finally stop running from the shadows that had chased him across 2 countries in 5 years of exile. Sofia Restrepo had stumbled into his path not by accident but by design, offering him something he'd never expected to find again, a chance to be the man Maria had married instead of the ghost he'd become. Checo pulled out his phone and started typing a text to Webb. I need everything you have on Salinas's current operations. Warehouse locations, shipping schedules, personnel files. And I need it in 20 minutes. He paused before hitting send, his thumb hovering over the screen. Once he sent this message, there would be no turning back. No more quiet desperation in a little Havana apartment. No more mornings pretending the past didn't matter. But as he looked around at the sleeping neighborhood he'd sworn to protect, Checo realized he'd already made his choice the moment he'd put on the badge 5 years ago. Some promises were worth dying for. He sent the text and started walking toward the bay, where death and redemption waited in equal measure. Crossing the threshold, Webb's response came faster than Checo expected, his phone vibrating as he reached the corner of Flagler and 12th. The message contained 3 attachments and a warning. This intel is 72 hours old. Salinas rotates locations every 48. Use it wisely. Checo ducked into the shadows of a closed cafe to study the files. Warehouse blueprints, shipping manifests, personnel photos, the bureaucratic skeleton of a drug empire laid bare in federal documentation. But one detail caught his attention like a fishhook to the eye. Pier 7 wasn't just a meeting location. According to Webb's intelligence, it was the staging area for Salinas's next shipment, the massive fentanyl operation Sofia had been investigating. They're not just killing us, they're using us. The realization hit him with the force of revelation. This wasn't about revenge or sending a message to law enforcement. Salinas was cleaning house before the biggest operation of his career, eliminating the 2 people who could derail months of planning. The public execution of a DEA agent and a former cartel hunter would send shockwaves through every agency from Miami to Quantico, paralyzing investigations while his poison flooded American streets. Checo's phone rang again, an unknown number with a Colombian country code. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hola, Detective Vasquez. The voice belonged to death itself, cultured and soft, with the refined accent of Bogotá's upper class. You recognize my voice, I think. Eduardo Maradona Salinas, the man who had ordered the execution of Maria and Ana, the architect of nightmares who had turned Checo from a decorated agent into a haunted exile. 5 years of silence, and now he was calling like an old friend checking in. I know you. Claro que sí. We have unfinished business, you and I. Your family in Medellin, such a tragedy. But necessary, you understand. You were getting too close to my operations. Salinas paused, and Checo could hear the smile in his voice. Tonight, we finish what we started. The casual cruelty of it, discussing Maria and Ana's murder like a business transaction, ignited something primal in Checo's chest. 5 years of suppressed rage crystallized into perfect cold fury. The trembling in his hands stopped, The weight of the go bag disappeared. For the first time since fleeing Colombia, he felt like himself again. Where's Agent Restrepo? Safe. Uncomfortable, but safe. My men are artists, detective. They know how to keep someone alive for a very long time. Another pause, pregnant with implied violence. She's quite beautiful, your DEA friend. It would be a shame if something happened to that face. If you touch her. You'll what? Come to save her? Salinas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That's exactly what you'll do, because you're predictable, Carlos. 5 years in Miami, and you still think like a policeman. Still believe in justice, in saving innocent people. It's admirable, also fatal. Checo found himself walking faster, drawn toward the bay by gravity he couldn't resist. Each step took him further from safety, from the possibility of calling for backup or involving other agencies. But backup meant delays, protocols, jurisdictional disputes. It meant Sofia bleeding out in a warehouse while federal agents debated operational parameters. Pier 7, 20 minutes. Salinas' voice carried the confidence of a man who had never lost a game. Come alone, or she dies screaming. Come armed, and she dies faster. Your choice. The line went dead, leaving Checo alone with the humid Miami night and the weight of an impossible decision. Every tactical instinct screamed that he was walking into a slaughter. Salinas had resources, manpower, and the home field advantage of preparation. The smart play was to call Webb, coordinate with whatever clean agents remained, mount a proper rescue operation. But Sofia didn't have time for smart plays, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, the man who had destroyed his family was waiting with enough poison to kill thousands of Americans. Checo stopped walking and pulled out his service weapon, checking the magazine by muscle memory. 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber, 16 bullets between him and the most powerful cartel boss in the hemisphere. The math was laughable, but mathematics had never been the point. This was about the promise he'd made to Maria on her deathbed, to never stop fighting, never let evil win by default. It was about Anna's piano lessons, Sofia's defiant eyes, Mrs. Garcia's grandchildren sleeping safely in little Havana apartments. It was about every family that would never exist if Salinas' fentanyl reached American streets. Checo holstered his weapon and shouldered the go bag, feeling the familiar weight of purpose settle into his bones. Behind him lay 5 years of careful anonymity, of survival disguised as living. Ahead waited either redemption or death, maybe both. The choice, he realized, had been made the moment he put his hands on Sofia's shoulders. Everything since then had been just walking toward the inevitable. Checo checked his watch and started running toward the bay, where his past and future converged at Pier 7. Tests and allies. The smell hit Checo before he saw the water. Diesel fuel, rotting fish, and something else that made his DEA instincts prickle with recognition. Industrial solvent, the kind used to process cocaine into its purest form, or to dissolve bodies when the Everglades weren't convenient. Bayfront Park stretched before him like an amphitheater of shadows, the Miami skyline glittering beyond the black expanse of Biscayne Bay. Pier 7 jutted into the darkness like an accusatory finger, its weathered planks illuminated by security lights that turned the surrounding water into liquid obsidian. Checo crouched behind a concrete barrier, studying the terrain through eyes trained by 15 years of hunting predators. 2 speedboats flanked the pier, their engines idling low. Men in expensive suits positioned themselves with military precision. 3 on the dock, 2 more barely visible in the tree line, at least 1 sniper's nest on the parking garage across Biscayne Boulevard. Professional, prepared, lethal. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Not Salinas this time. The display showed a Miami area code. Detective Vasquez? This is Captain Elena Morales, Miami-Dade Marine Patrol. Checo's blood chilled. Captain, you need to clear this area immediately. There's going to be... I know what there's going to be. Her voice carried the weight of command and something else, personal stakes. Agent Webb contacted me 20 minutes ago. My patrol has been tracking unusual boat traffic in the bay all evening. The pieces clicked together with mathematical precision. Webb hadn't abandoned the operation when his safe house was compromised. He'd adapted, reaching out to local resources Salinas couldn't have anticipated. Clean cops with jurisdiction over the water approach. Captain, these aren't drug dealers. They're cartel enforcers with military training. If you move on them... My daughter overdosed on fentanyl last year, Detective. 15 years old. Morales' voice hardened into something approaching Sophia's defiant fire. So when the DEA tells me Salinas is planning to flood our streets with enough poison to kill thousands of kids, I don't much care about protocols. An ally. The first piece of good fortune in a night filled with calculated disasters. But Checo could hear the dangerous edge in the captain's voice, the same reckless courage that had driven him to jump from his apartment window. Grief and rage made powerful motivators, but they also made people dead. What's your tactical situation? 3 patrol boats, 12 officers, all volunteers. We're positioned 500 yards south of the pier, running dark. But Detective, Morales paused, and Checo could hear engines rumbling in the background. There's something else. We've been monitoring radio chatter. Salinas has backup coming, a cargo ship about 30 minutes out, flying Panamanian colors but broadcasting Colombian frequencies. The implications crashed over Checo like a cold wave. This wasn't just an execution, it was the final stage of the fentanyl operation. Salinas planned to eliminate the 2 biggest threats to his shipment, then transfer his cargo under the cover of their deaths. By morning, enough synthetic death to devastate the eastern seaboard would be moving through Miami's port system. Captain, you need to contact the Coast Guard, DEA, anyone with authority to intercept that ship. Already tried. The federal agencies are locked in jurisdictional disputes, and Coast Guard is dealing with a suspicious vessel near Key Largo. Probably a diversion. We're on our own until dawn. On our own. The phrase should have been terrifying, but instead Checo felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. The solidarity of shared purpose. In Colombia, he'd learned that the most dangerous operations often came down to small groups of committed people choosing to stand against impossible odds. I need 15 minutes alone on that pier, he told Morales. Whatever happens, don't move until you see my signal. What signal? Checo reached into his go-bag and pulled out a flare gun he'd acquired during his more paranoid months, when every shadow might have hidden cartel assassins. You'll know it when you see it. Movement on the pier caught his attention. A warehouse door rolled open, spilling yellow light across the dock. 2 figures emerged. Sofia Restrepo, her hands zip-tied behind her back, and a man Checo recognized from Webb's intelligence files. Miguel Santos, Salinas' chief enforcer, known for his creative approach to interrogation. Even from 200 yards, Checo could see Sofia was hurt. She moved stiffly, favoring her left side, but her head was up and her shoulders straight. Still fighting, still calculating. The sight of her defiance sparked something protective and furious in his chest. Detective? Morales' voice pulled him back to the present. We have visual on the hostage. My people are good shots, but at this range, no. 1 stray bullet and she's dead. This has to be close. Checo checked his weapon one final time and started moving toward the pier, keeping to the shadows of parked cars and concrete barriers. Behind him lay every life he'd failed to save. Ahead waited the chance to finally balance those scales. The rules of this new world were brutal but simple. Trust the allies who shared your pain, and never let evil win by default. Time to see which truth was stronger. The approach. The distance between the concrete barrier and Pier 7 might as well have been a mile of no man's land. Checo counted his steps as he moved through the shadows, each footfall bringing him closer to either redemption or a bullet. 50 yards of open ground lay ahead, parking lot asphalt that would leave him completely exposed once he committed to the approach. His earpiece crackled with Morales' voice, barely above a whisper. Detective, we're picking up radio chatter. They know you're here. Of course they did. Salinas hadn't survived 15 years of cartel warfare by underestimating his enemies. The question wasn't whether they'd spotted him, but how long they'd let him get before springing whatever trap they'd prepared. Checo pressed himself against a rusted shipping container, feeling the metal's heat radiating against his back despite the late hour. Through a gap in the stacked cargo, he could see Sofia more clearly now. Santos had positioned her at the pier's edge like bait, her DEA training evident in how she kept her weight balanced despite the restraints. Ready to move if the opportunity came. She's counting on you not to be an idiot. The thought carried Maria's voice again, sharp with the practical wisdom that had made her such an effective police psychologist. She'd always been able to read situations with clinical clarity, seeing past the emotion to the tactical reality underneath. Sophia wasn't just a victim waiting for rescue. She was an experienced federal agent who'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the hemisphere. "Morales," Checo whispered into his radio, "I need you to create a distraction. Something to draw their attention to the water." "What kind of distraction?" "Surprise me." Checo began his final approach, abandoning stealth for speed as he sprinted across the open asphalt. Behind him, the distant rumble of marine engines suddenly roared to life, Morales' patrol boats accelerating toward the pier with spotlights blazing. The cartel sentries immediately swiveled toward the water, automatic weapons tracking the approaching lights. It bought him exactly what he needed, 10 seconds of divided attention. He rolled behind a concrete piling just as the first shots erupted from the pier. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like deadly fireworks, the crack of rifle fire echoing off the warehouse walls. But the angles were wrong. The enforcers were shooting at shadows on the water, not realizing their real target was already beneath them. Checo could hear Santos shouting orders in rapid-fire Spanish, his voice carrying the controlled panic of a man whose perfect operation was suddenly unraveling. The boats had stopped just outside effective range, their spotlights creating confusion rather than clarity. Professional harassment designed to rattle, not destroy. Give them something else to think about. Checo pulled the flare gun from his bag, angling it toward the warehouse where the bulk of Salinas' operation waited. Intelligence suggested dozens of workers, millions in product, and enough synthetic death to justify any risk. The phosphorus round would turn their base into an inferno, forcing them to choose between pursuing him and saving their investment. He was squeezing the trigger when Sophia's voice cut through the gunfire, clear and commanding despite her restraints. "Carlos, the ship." She was looking past the pier toward the bay's horizon, where running lights had appeared like malevolent stars. The cargo vessel Morales had mentioned, arriving ahead of schedule with reinforcements and extraction capability. In minutes, this contained tactical situation would explode into a running battle across Miami's waterfront. The flare gun felt suddenly inadequate in his hands. Even if he destroyed the warehouse, even if he rescued Sophia, they'd still face a ship full of cartel soldiers with nowhere to run. The bay behind them, hostile reinforcements ahead, and civilian neighborhoods on all sides where stray bullets could shatter innocent lives. This is bigger than just us. The realization hit him with crystalline clarity. This wasn't about personal redemption or settling old scores. It was about stopping a poison pipeline that would claim thousands of American lives. Sophia hadn't just stumbled into his path. She'd been fighting a war he'd abandoned when he fled Colombia. Checo's radio crackled again. "Detective, we've got federal backup inbound. Coast Guard cutters, DEA helicopters, but they're 20 minutes out." 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. The cargo ship was already dropping anchor, and he could see inflatable boats launching from its deck. Santos had moved Sophia closer to the warehouse, using her as a human shield while his men repositioned for the arriving reinforcements. But there was something else, movement in the warehouse shadows that didn't match cartel tactical patterns. Figures moving with different urgency, different purpose. Workers, maybe, or prisoners. Sophia's investigation had uncovered more than just a drug shipment. She'd found a human trafficking operation masquerading as legitimate cargo. The weight of that knowledge settled into Checo's chest like lead. Every minute of delay meant more lives at risk, more families destroyed by Salinas' expanding empire. The math was brutal but simple. Stop this operation now, or watch it metastasize beyond any agency's ability to contain. Checo took a deep breath, tasting salt air and diesel fumes, and started climbing toward the pier where his past and future converged in 15 rounds of ammunition and one last chance to balance the scales. The first rung of the pier ladder felt slick with salt spray and something darker, blood maybe, or the industrial chemicals that had been eating away at the concrete pilings for decades. Checo pulled himself up slowly, his service weapon heavy against his ribs, the flare gun tucked into his belt like a promise of controlled chaos. Above him, Santos's voice carried across the night with the casual authority of a man accustomed to inflicting pain. "Bring him to the center. I want Salinas to see his face when we start cutting." Sophia's response came through gritted teeth, defiant Spanish that made Santos laugh like breaking glass. She was buying time, drawing attention away from the ladder where Checo climbed towards certain death or impossible victory. Every second of her courage added another rung between him and the black water below. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated walls pocked with bullet holes from the running firefight with Morales's patrol boats. Through the gaps, Checo could see the full scope of Salinas's operation. Pallets of white powder stacked like building blocks, industrial mixing equipment that could process raw fentanyl into street-ready death, and something that made his blood freeze, shipping containers modified with air holes and crude sanitation facilities. Human cargo, dozens of them, possibly hundreds, trapped in metal boxes while their lives were auctioned to the highest bidders in American cities. Sophia hadn't just uncovered a drug shipment, she'd found a slave auction masquerading as legitimate commerce. The moral mathematics shifted like tectonic plates in his mind. This wasn't about personal vengeance anymore, wasn't even about stopping drugs from reaching American streets. Every container represented families destroyed, children who would vanish into exploitation networks that spanned continents, the kind of evil that demanded payment in blood, not justice. Checo reached the pier's deck and pressed himself against a concrete barrier, counting muzzle flashes in the darkness. 6 shooters visible, probably twice that number hidden in defensive positions. Professional placement, overlapping fields of fire, escape routes secured. Santos had learned from the mistakes of lesser cartel enforcers. This operation was designed to survive federal assault, but it wasn't designed to survive a man with nothing left to lose. His radio crackled with Webb's voice, distorted by encryption but unmistakably urgent. Checo, thermal imaging shows at least 40 civilians in those containers. We can't use heavy weapons without massive collateral damage. Lives hanging in the balance. Men, women, maybe children, trapped in metal ovens while bullets flew overhead and chemical fire waited in the flare gun at his belt. One wrong decision, one misplaced shot, and their rescue became their execution. The cargo ship's engines grew louder, its bulk blocking out stars as it maneuvered toward the pier. Zodiac boats filled with reinforcements cut through the black water like sharks sensing blood. In minutes, this contained disaster would become urban warfare, with Miami's skyline as backdrop and innocent families caught in the crossfire. Everything he'd learned in 15 years of fighting monsters crystallized into perfect, terrifying clarity. There were no clean solutions, no tactical miracles that would save everyone. The choice was brutal but simple. Act now with inadequate resources, or watch evil metastasize beyond any possibility of containment. Santos appeared at the warehouse entrance, dragging Sophia beside him like a trophy. Even in the harsh security lighting, Checo could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she tested her restraints while maintaining the performance of helpless captivity. Still an agent, still fighting, still trusting him not to be the fool her situation required. "Detective Carlos Vasquez!" Santos's voice boomed across the pier like a carnival barker announcing the main attraction. "Come out and see what we've prepared for you." The words carried echoes of another warehouse, another night when Checo had arrived too late to save the people who mattered most. Maria's voice whispered in the salt wind, reminding him that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward when fear tried to paralyze you with the memory of past failures. Checo checked his weapon one final time, feeling the familiar weight of 16 rounds between him and approximately 60 cartel soldiers. The mathematics were absurd, but mathematics had never been about justice. This was about promises made to dying wives, about Anna's piano music echoing across 5 years of survivor's guilt, about Sophia's defiant eyes trusting him to be better than his worst mistakes. Behind him lay 5 years of careful anonymity of survival disguised as living. Ahead waited either redemption or death, probably both. The cargo containers filled with human suffering, the pallets of synthetic poison, the expanding empire of Salinas's cruelty, all of it balanced against one damaged cop's last chance to tip the scales toward something resembling justice. Checo pulled the flare gun from his belt and stepped into the light, where his deepest fears and greatest challenge converged in the humid Miami darkness. Time to discover whether 15 rounds and desperate courage could stop a pipeline of evil that stretched from Colombian laboratories to American playgrounds. The ordeal had begun. The flare erupted from Checo's gun like a miniature comet, arcing over the pier in a brilliant red trajectory that should have struck the warehouse and turned Salinas' operation into an inferno. Instead, it sailed harmlessly over the building and hissed into the black water beyond, leaving nothing but the acrid smell of phosphorus and the echo of his miscalculation. Santos's laughter cut through the night like a blade. The great detective Vasquez, still the same man who arrived too late to save his family in Medellin. The words hit harder than any bullet could have. Santos knew, not just about the blown assignment 5 years ago, but about the specifics, how Checo had spent crucial minutes clearing the wrong building while Maria and Ana died 3 blocks away, how his careful tactical approach had cost the 2 lives that mattered most. "You see, Detective, we've been watching you much longer than you know." Santos dragged Sofia closer to the pier's edge, where the black water waited like an open grave. Eduardo wanted to understand the man who killed his nephew. "We studied your service record, your family, your failures." Muzzle flashes erupted from positions Checo hadn't even seen, a perfectly orchestrated crossfire that drove him scrambling behind a concrete barrier as bullets chewed chunks from the pier around him. His 15 rounds felt pathetic against the coordinated assault, each shot requiring him to expose himself to return fire that never seemed to find its mark. Through his earpiece, he heard Morales' voice tight with panic. "Detective, we're taking heavy fire from the cargo ship. They've got mounted weapons. We have to fall back." The patrol boat's engines roared as they retreated toward safer waters, their spotlights swinging wildly before disappearing entirely. In seconds, Checo's backup had evaporated, leaving him alone on a pier controlled by professional killers who knew his every weakness. But worse was coming. The Zodiac boats from the cargo ship hit the pier with military precision, disgorging black-clad figures who moved like special forces operators, not street thugs or local muscle. These were Salinas' elite guards, men trained in Colombian death squads who treated human life like an accounting problem. "The containers, Detective!" Sofia's voice carried desperate urgency as Santos forced her toward the warehouse. "They're rigged with thermite charges. If we don't—" Santos backhanded her into silence, but the damage was done. Checo could see the industrial cables now, running from a central detonator to each shipping container where 40 innocent lives waited for rescue. Salinas hadn't just planned to eliminate witnesses. He intended to destroy all evidence of the human trafficking operation, turning 40 people into ash and dental records. Checo's radio crackled with Webb's voice, distorted by distance and desperation. "Federal backup is delayed. Coast Guard engaged with decoy vessels, DEA grounded by weather. You're alone for at least 30 minutes. 30 minutes. The number landed in his chest like a death sentence. Around him, cartel reinforcements were establishing a perimeter that could hold off a small army, while somewhere in the darkness, Salinas himself waited to witness the execution of the 2 people who'd threatened his empire. A new sound cut through the gunfire, the industrial whine of the thermite detonator powering up. Red lights began blinking on each container like malevolent Christmas decorations, counting down to mass murder. Sofia had been right. This wasn't just about eliminating 2 troublesome investigators. Salinas was burning down his entire Miami operation to protect something bigger. Through the warehouse windows, Checo caught glimpses of workers in hazmat suits frantically loading smaller containers onto the Zodiac boats. The fentanyl. While the human trafficking evidence burned, Salinas would escape with enough synthetic death to poison half the eastern seaboard. By dawn, this pier would be a crime scene with no evidence and no survivors to tell the story. Checo tried to reach his backup weapon and discovered blood soaking through his shirt, a grazing wound he hadn't even felt during the crossfire. Not serious, but enough to remind him that his body was 45 years old and running on adrenaline and survivor's guilt rather than tactical superiority. Santos appeared in the warehouse doorway. Sofia forced to her knees beside him. "Detective, you have 5 minutes to surrender before we begin the demonstration, and don't worry about your federal friend. Eduardo wants her to watch you die first." The thermite detonator's whine grew higher, more urgent. Red lights pulsed faster on the containers where 40 people waited for a rescue that would never come. In the distance, the cargo ship's engines rumbled to life, preparing to extract Salinas' core operation while the evidence burned. Checo pressed his back against the concrete barrier, feeling the weight of 16 rounds against 60 cartel soldiers, advanced weapons against his service pistol, professional killers against one damaged cop who'd already failed everyone who'd ever counted on him. All seemed lost. The plan had collapsed, the backup had fled, and somewhere in those containers, innocent people were counting down their final minutes while he cowered behind concrete, just like 5 years ago in Medellin.